and welcome to the Animal Training Academy Making Ripples podcast show, the show where we share the stories of the ripple-making extraordinaires with behavior nerd superpowers who make up the Animal Training Academy membership. I'm your host and one of the happiness engineers at Animal Training Academy, Shelley Wood from Drop Your Jaws Dog Training in Cape Girardeau, Missouri in the United States. We're absolutely thrilled and grateful to have you here with us today. Make sure you go ahead and hit that subscribe button so that you don't miss a single episode. This show is brought to you on behalf of the Animal Training Academy membership. So if you like the conversations in these episodes, then we want to invite you to continue them with like-minded people in the ATA membership, which you can find out more about at www.atamember.com. Within the membership, you can get access to twice monthly live web classes, the back catalog of previous web class replays, plus a huge library of videos and projects to help you problem solve your training challenges. And we're a sociable bunch with an exclusive private Facebook group and forums area. It's like a Netflix social media platform for animal behavior geeks. Today, I am excited to welcome SI to the show. SI lives with her husband of 37 years and their 5-year-old dog, Micki, whom she loves a ridiculous amount. While she grew up with an assortment of apartment-friendly pets, SI did not own nor even personally know a dog for most of her life. All that changed 21 years ago when her family got a puppy. That puppy inspired her to learn all she could about training. She has been a dedicated, quote, cookie pusher training enthusiast ever since. While that first puppy was the world's easiest dog to train, the arrival of Micki forced her to delve back into training and to explore that the ABCs of behavior meant much more than, quote, always bring cookies. Fortunately for Micki, SI, and their relationship, she came to appreciate the importance of listening to Micki and providing her with choice and control in her life. SI views her role as Micki's advocate to be of utmost importance. Welcome to the show, SI. I'm excited to have you with us today.
Thank you, Shelley. It's a little weird being here, but excited to be talking to you.
I completely understand. It's always a little weird for me to be here too, but I am always excited to talk to the awesome members who make up the Animal Training Academy, such as yourself. And I have absolutely loved learning from you in ATA, as well as in some other online spaces where we have found ourselves together at the same time. I'm always just incredibly impressed with both your thoughtfulness, the thoughtfulness you put into training, and with your training skill as well. So I'm excited to be able to learn more about you today and to share some of your wonderful experiences with more people.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Could you get us started off today by sharing with us a little bit about your journey into animal training, maybe some of the animals who have been a part of that journey and how you spend your days these days?
Okay. Well, I'll start off by saying that I am just a dog owner. Unlike your other podcast guests, I am not an animal professional. I don't otherwise work with dogs other than my own, which is why I asked you to just identify me by my initials. I am not an authority. I'm not an expert. No one should listen to this and say, oh, I heard so-and-so say something, because I'm just relaying experiences I've personally had with my dog. I say I'm a dog owner, but I like to think of myself as a very well-informed dog owner. I consider myself a behavior geek, a training nerd. I've always thought of myself as a learning junkie, that when there's something I'm interested in, I delve whole hog into it. And for the past 21 years, that field of interest has been training, which started with my first dog. I'm at the point in my life where I have the luxury of time to indulge these interests. I do a lot of reading. I do online learning, both in classes specifically to train Micki, but also classes and webinars for my knowledge, for me to learn more about behavior and training. I've always said my goal is to give my dogs the best possible life and to have the best possible relationship with them. And initially, I always told myself that I'm learning about this for my dog. But at some point, it became obvious to me I was also learning about it because of my own intellectual curiosity, that it piques something, it fills a need in me to learn about things. as I've said, to keep my brain from turning to tapioca pudding, to just keep my brain active. But to some extent, I've come full circle and finding that there's a lot of things that I've learned that at the time I didn't necessarily think were directly related to my dog in the moment, but ended up really preparing me to address the needs that came up, which I think, when we talk about some of the issues later, will become evident. So I always, and also, again, to sort of set me, where my mind is of who I am, I always think in terms of Alexandra Kurland's saying, which I'm paraphrasing because she talks about horses, that, go to people for opinions and animals for answers. And I absolutely love hearing people's opinions. It's one of the things I love about ATA, where some really experienced, bright people are offering their opinions. And then we also seeing the answers that their animals give. And quite honestly, I have, as people who've been on ATA probably know, I have a lot of opinions. And there's nothing I love more than getting into a good rabbit hole discussion about this. But I'm also very aware that ultimately I've only gotten the answers from my dogs. So on the other hand, that's sort of a limiting thing. It also means I don't have the pressure to worry about how my opinions apply to other dogs. I just need to be an expert on Micki. She is my study of one. I'm a trainer of one. It's all a matter of, how things work for Micki now. In terms of the pets in my life, I grew up in apartment buildings that did not allow dogs. So we had, assorted rodents, hamsters, gerbils, guinea pigs, cats. Never thought in terms of training. And then 21 years ago, my family decided, time to get a puppy because, shouldn't every family at some point in time have a puppy? And again, because I don't do anything just go and do, I researched and I went, this is 21 years ago. I physically went to the library, took out these things called VHS tapes, which may now only live in museums. I know. So that's how long ago it's looked for training tapes. And I sat with my daughters watching these training tapes. And to be honest, we sat there and our jaws just dropped. If they have to explain, and the correct way to put the choke chain on is this way, so it releases as opposed to you continuing to choke your dog, something just didn't strike us well. And, and there was one particular, at one point, the guy is lifting the dog up off the ground. And my younger daughter, one of the proudest moments I have had as a parent, my younger daughter says, "We're not going to do that to our puppy, are we?" And I said, "No, we're not," which then meant I needed to find what we were going to do with our puppy. And, 21 years ago, there was not a lot out there. There was a smattering of stuff. And I found the Yahoo groups, which I know a lot of people in ATA have mentioned, which were amazing. There was a handful of books, Gene Donaldson. It's sort of every time a good positive training book came out and was mentioned on a Yahoo list, it was like, you read it and tried to get what you could out of it. So I did training. I managed to find a local trainer who was positive based. It took a lot of phone calls to do that. And that first dog, as you said in my intro, was the world's easiest dog to train. She never met a food reward she wouldn't work for. The only food the joke was, the only thing she wouldn't eat was a raw mushroom. It once fell on the floor and she spit it out saying, "This isn't food." Other than that, this dog worked for anything. She saw the clicker, she saw the treat bag, and it was like, "I'm ready. Just tell me what you want," and convinced me I was a pretty good trainer because I could train this dog, to do a lot. She lived 15 and a half years. And then I got Micki. And now people talk about heart dogs and, that dog that just completely fills your heart. And that first dog was a heart dog. And Micki is also now a heart dog. But what I say about Micki also is she's not just a heart dog. She was my heart surgeon. Because after my first dog died, I felt like my heart had just broken into thousands of pieces and just inconsolable. Weeks went by and it was just, anyone who's lost a dog they love knows that feeling. And then Micki came and she put my heart back together and completely filled it. But Micki was not an easy puppy. And I'm just going to give a couple of illustrations of, we went to puppy class right away, back to the same trainer I had used with my first dog, who had since gone to KPA and was, doing clicker training. And that's the best thing I could say about her, is she had also grown in her what she was teaching. And, two basic things you try to teach in puppy class. One, don't teach the dog not to dash through a door, because it's a safety thing. Never reinforce the dog on the outside of a door. You do not want to create a door dasher. Work on teaching them to be calm and stay on, the side of the door until you release them. And the other thing was go to mat, stay on mat, sit on mat, be on mat, exist on mat, lay on mat. Okay. And everyone in the class is working on these things. Okay. Mat training wasn't easy with Micki because she viewed a mat as something to wrestle with, to chew with, to, throw around. And that was more reinforcing to her than any food I could be giving her to be on the mat. I eventually ended up using a yoga mat just because it was a nice flat thing and that wasn't something, I guess, appealing to her to chew on. With the door dashing, my problem was always getting Micki to walk through a door. She never did transitions well. She got any door, going out in the backyard, coming back in from the backyard, going into the crate, coming back out of the crate, going into the car, coming out of the car. Every transition was sort of like on the computer when it's processing and you'll see that little blue circle whirling. That's what it felt like looking for Micki. Like every transition was, should I do this? Shouldn't I do this? So there were a lot of labels applied to Micki. She was very playful, and the world was her toy box, which also made it then hard to use any props in training, like the example of the mat. I couldn't use snuffle mats because she'd rip those apart. The first time I tried to teach her to walk over Cavalettis, she saw a big stick and picked it up and ran off with it. And in terms of trying to harness that training for finding the toys for training, she loved playing tug. She loved playing fetch, but she also loved possessing and chewing. So, I once tried, to enforce rules for tug and this to be able to use it as a reinforcer, and she just lost interest. It's like, no, I'm sorry. If I don't get a chance to chew, toy has no meaning. And what I found interesting is just recently I was catching up on some of the Clicker Expo sessions, and I watched Ken Ramirez's on reinforcer. And at one point he says, don't think of the toy as the reinforcer. It's what the dog does with the toy. And some dogs just want to possess and chew the toy. And I'm like, yes, that was Micki. Now, of course, the difference is Ken Ramirez would be able to say, okay, now that we know that, how are we going to use it as reinforcement? And I was just like, I'm not going to fight with the dog. I'm just going to let her, toys are for play, not for training mostly. Now, in terms of training, she could get easily frustrated. She would get up, walk away. She would spit out treats. Literally, she'd take a treat and put it in her mouth and spit it out. It was always very difficult to predict what reinforcement she would take. She would take a treat in one situation, I'd switch to train something else, and she'd spit it out. So I never knew from moment to moment what she'd do. Now, I don't want to make it sound like I didn't do any training. I did. We took a series of courses with this trainer, but boy, did she make me work hard. Now, what I had learned with my first dog was that it was all about consequences. Look at better treats. What are higher value treats you can use? I don't ever recall there being a discussion when I was learning about with that first dog of antecedents. If there was anything, it was sort of give a cue, behavior, reinforce. That nothing about antecedents beyond the idea that you gave a cue. So, and you weren't supposed to sort of help the dog figure it out. You were supposed to wait, get the behavior, reinforce, which worked okay with my first dog. She'd throw behaviors, you could click, you could reinforce. Micki was just like, no, I get up and walk away if she didn't know the path to reinforcement. So I had to dive to meet Micki's needs. I had to dive back in. And thankfully, this was now a period of 16 years since I had started with my first dog, the amount of good, positive reinforcement information that was available had exploded. And it wasn't even just a matter, are you going to use food in your training, but how are you going to use food? Which positive reinforcement approach are you going to use? I found more books. I found podcasts, which certainly didn't exist when, I had started. I found the ATA podcast. And two things happened that profoundly changed my training in terms of things I learned, both around the point where I'd had Micki about a year. One of them was I heard Sarah Owings talk about stimulus control, and not stimulus control in the sense of you give a cue and you want perfect stimulus control that the dog will respond to that cue and only that cue and do only that behavior. But stimulus control in the sense of if the dog is doing a behavior, look and see what are the stimuli that are causing that behavior, So I guess looking at it a little backwards, not I am giving a cue. What do they do? If they're doing what's cueing, what is in fact cueing the behavior that you're not aware of. The other thing that happened around that time is I joined ATA and I, went back and binge watched prior webinars. And of course, the Dr. Susan Friedman webinars, which I think Ryan even recommended you start with. And at one point, I hear Dr. Friedman say, control is a primary reinforcer. And it was like someone smacked me on the side of the head, like, duh, and I just, I had been hearing things about control and choice and all that, but it became obvious to me, first of all, that contextual cues were very important for Micki, and that she was feeding off contextual cues that I hadn't been aware of, and that also being in control was very important to Micki, almost as important as food had been for my first dog. Control was to Micki. And I always, as a positive reinforcement trainer, I always felt the dog had a choice to say no. The dog had that choice. But this was about so much more. This wasn't just about being able to opt out. This was about asking, what do you want? Giving a choice. Tell me what it is you want. So I started finding as many opportunities to ask her that, what toy do you want to play with? What treat do you want to work for? Like before training, do you want this treat or that treat? Huge difference maker, because once she got to choose which treat, there was less spitting out the treats once we started working. It was like, okay, I'm working for this. I could even ask, do you want to work for the treat or the toy? Husbandry, instead of trying just to train, we are now going to file your nails. Do you want me to file your nails or do you want me to brush your teeth? Do you want me to comb your fur or do you want me to file? And her being able to choose just, made such a difference. And, it's not that I just turned things loose and it was free for all. Micki, just tell me anything you want. I felt it was like curated choices, setting the antecedents to make, to present the choice and give her control. I sort of analogize to if you want, toddler wants to choose what they want to get dressed and wear. You don't bring them in front of the closet and say, okay, pick your outfit. You pull out 2 or 3 outfits and you say, okay, which of these? So it was a curated choice to help her have a sense of agency. And I have to say, this was an absolute game changer. I think it then formed the basis of a trust relationship between us. And it just snowballed almost that once I gave her this choice and control, it's like she needed to demand it less. She just became much more cooperative. We were able to explore more in our training. I was also learning about errorless training at this time, which in essence is also the similar thing where you're setting up the antecedents so that the dog makes the choice you want. And I just found Micki becoming increasingly resilient in our relationship. And I've heard Dr. Friedman describe resilience as what you do when there's a low rate of reinforcement. Do you have the experience and control of your outcomes to access reinforcers? And Micki had learned how to access reinforcers, that if she didn't get something right away, that if she stuck with me, I wouldn't let her flounder. I wouldn't let her not get it right 3-4 times. I change an antecedent and she'd get it. I found a snuffle mat that would work for her. And there was always a snuffle mat nearby. If she ever needed a break, she could go to the snuffle mat. I would toss treats on the snuffle mat. So there was always an avenue to reinforcement. And I just feel that she became more resilient in our training. I like to think in terms of what I do, that I'm not going to ask her a question that I don't think she is ready to try to answer.
That is great. Thank you so much for sharing all of that with us. I love at the beginning, when you first started talking, you mentioned that you like to think of yourself as a well-informed owner. And I would say that that's an understatement, in my opinion. But definitely a decent start is how to put that. And I love that your stated goal of having the best possible life with and relationship with Micki, to giving her the best possible life and having the best possible relationship together. And I'm wondering, I love this information that you're talking. It's really cool for me to hear you as somebody who was part of the positive reinforcement animal world training from the beginning of your dog training journey until now, and how you've kind of seen the evolution of that. And it's really interesting to hear you talk through those changes to a place now where you're focused more on antecedents and setting up a lot of choice and things for the animal who you are working with. And I know that you want to kind of dive in and talk about some more specific things that we're going to talk about in a minute here. So I don't know if this can be done in a nutshell or not, but if it, okay, it would be great, I think, to hear a little bit about how you might how you might set up a training session with Micki that would allow her to have the choice between, say, getting her nails done or her teeth brushed or some sort of alternative like that. Does that question make sense?
No, that's right. Actually, the husbandry work I've done with Micki is one of sort of the proudest things I have, because my first dog, with everything I did, I never got where she liked having her nails done. Those were always done at the groomers, never did her teeth. And in fact, she ended up having dental issues and needed dental surgery. So from the beginning, I felt those were real priorities. So basically, I started training these sort of separately. But then when it would become time I'd want to do something, I would literally just hold up two things, because I'd already done this with toys. Which toys do you want to play with? And she would smack the toy she wanted to play with. I had offered the treats. Which one do you want? And she would smack the hand with the treat she wanted. So then when I moved into husbandry, it's like, okay, I'm holding up the nail file and I'm holding up the toothbrush. Which do you want? And she would smack that one. And then that's what we would do. And of course, I would also reinforce, just making the choice, she would get a treat. Then she would sort of settle down at the position, get a treat, get a treat, and constantly reinforcing. But quite honestly, what I love about our husbandry is right now, I keep the comb, the file, and the toothbrush on the end table next to the chair I sit on in the den. And there's also usually a container of treats there. At some point during every day, Micki jumps in my lap, and a lot of times she just jumps in my lap to cuddle, but at some point she'll jump in my lap and she will smack the end table. And that's, in my view, her request, come on, let's do some husbandry stuff. And then I'll pick up two things. Okay, which one do you want? Sometimes she starts with nail filing. Sometimes she starts with toothbrushing. We'll do that. Then usually I'll hold up the other one. And sometimes she'll jump off my lap. Nope, I don't want to do that now. Sometimes she'll come back later and I'll say, now do you want to do it? And she'll smack it and we'll do it. So that's, it's like very, in listening to Micki, for some reason, we went through a period of time where one of her front paws was sensitive and she started not wanting me to file that. And I'm like, oh, what am I going to do? Got to get over it. And I just sort of said, have trust in her, just have faith. And after a while, whatever was bothering her or whatever, she can't, and she let me do that. So just, again, it's just this mutual trust. You tell me what you want to do and I'll respond to it. And I'm going to trust that because I'm letting you choose, you will ask.
Thank you for diving in a little bit deeper on that with me. I really like what you just said about listening to her and learning to kind of trust that what she's telling you. And there have been a couple times lately when I haven't felt great, like nothing major or anything, maybe just a headache or sick to my stomach or something. And it has dawned on me that like our dogs have things that are bothering them, from time to time. And that made me think of it when you were talking about the paw with her, like right now.
We always assume that if they're trained to do it, they should always do it. And if they don't do it, what is it? Let me look at my training, protocol. And it could be, it's an off day,
Yeah.
It's just, they don't want to do it that day.
Yeah, for sure. And so I want to just kind of for my own self, I want to be sure that I kind of have a grasp on what you were talking about the choice piece. So it sounds to me like you kind of had already trained the components all separately and in different contexts. So she had the skill of, I know how to select something and I know how to select something easy and fun in a situation that I like. And I know how to have my nails done and I know how to have my teeth brushed or whatever the case may be. And so then that all just kind of got put together.
Yes. And part of that was, I don't know if that was the plan at the beginning. Part of that just sort of emerged at first learning. First, I wanted, and then putting it all together. If I had a new puppy, how I would start from the beginning. And I'm not planning on getting a new puppy, but, how would I start that at the beginning? Would I, I know, but it worked out well doing it this way. So, I just heard that, I think it was on a podcast of Alexandra Kurland's where she had someone that learning to choose is a skill, learning to make choices, that just like that toddler that initially you might give them 3 choices and then they learn to make a choice from 6 choices. And then eventually they can go to the whole closet and make a choice. So I guess, if we think about that, we want to give control, we want to give choice, but there's also people caution too much choice can be overwhelming. But I think making a choice is also a skill that can be learned by not overwhelming the dog and introducing the idea that you get to choose.
I'm so glad you said that. Yes, I think making a choice is a skill. And before we just dump a whole ton of choices on another individual, it's good to know that they have the skill to make those choices. Otherwise, it could be really confusing. And based on some of the things that you've said, I have a feeling that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like maybe Micki finds confusion aversive.
Yes. I mean, she did, she was easily frustrated, but like I say, I think she's become more resilient. So what used to be overwhelming confusion is now just, okay, I need to, I just got to get back to where I'm going to get reinforcement and we'll go from there. So, and I think that's what, like I say, again, harking back to how I heard Dr. Friedman describe it, that's sort of what resilience is, that it's a confidence to know I can control things and get to the reinforcement.
Very good. Well, I would love to hear a little bit more about your training with Micki, and I have a feeling that we're going to get to do that with the rest of the questions in the show. So I'm wondering if you could share with us now about a recent training related challenge that you've experienced. Kind of talk to us about how you worked through it or are working through it and some things that you learned in that process.
Okay. So you define this as a training challenge, but what I'm really going to be talking about is sort of a medical behavioral issues and how inextricably the two are tied together. I pointed out to you, I'm wearing a t-shirt now that says health impacts behavior, behavior impacts health. And it's sort of, I saw the shirt and I had to buy it. We know that Dr. Friedman has this amazing hierarchy of behavioral intervention. And first step is wellness. Second step is antecedents arrangements. And third step is positive reinforcement. And I think when we think of training, we're often thinking about that third level. How am I using positive reinforcement? Most of what I'm going to be talking about is down at those other 2 levels. Wellness, it's sort of easy. And you always say, well, first, make sure the dog is healthy. Get the vet checkup, make sure it's healthy. As if that's sort of a checklist. Okay, went to the vet, everything's good. But it can be, so much more complicated that. I mean, the example I think of is like with aggression, how much of a certain percentage of aggression is actually the dog is in undiagnosed pain. And it can be hard to diagnose the pain. So you can go once to the vet and I'm saying, no, I don't see anything. And it might take multiple visits and multiple tests until, oh, yes, there is pain. And now we can do something about it. And then that doesn't mean we've now solved the aggression because the dog has a behavioral history of responding a certain way. But then it makes it easier then to pursue the behavioral modification part of it. But even then, you never know, the pain meds that are working on Monday may not be enough on Tuesday. And, the weather may be different. I know my knees hurt when it's going to be a thunderstorm, or the underlying condition could get worse. So it's sort of you always, even once you think, I know what the medical issues are or aren't, and I'm taking care of them and I can focus on behavioral modification, you can never stop focusing on the wellness as well. Now, Dr. Friedman, in her brilliant hierarchy, she has the visual of it being a car driving, and there are different exit ramps. And the first exit ramp is wellness. And if you can solve the behavioral issue by addressing the dog's wellness, that's great. You don't get to the other issues. But what I think is important, I think a trap that some people can fall into is, okay, wellness didn't resolve the person. I'm going to continue on the highway. In my mind, the analogy that works for me, and anyone can take from it what they want, but the analogy that works for me is that you don't just drive past that exit, you pick up a passenger. Wellness is the passenger in the car through everything else. And I also visually, and this is probably from my history of having been a parent, I think of that passenger as being an pre-verbal toddler. And you can put them in the back seat, and hopefully as you're driving on the highway, they're sleeping soundly, and you never hear from the wellness toddler in the back seat. But you need to keep glancing up in the rearview mirror. Is he still asleep? Is he starting to fuss? Do I need to pass a toy back to him? Does he need the bag of Cheerios? Before you end up with a screaming toddler because you weren't addressing it. So like I say, so in my mind, wellness, as you're dealing with all the other behavior thing, is that inarticulate toddler in the car that you always need to be aware of. So now, as you're addressing these things, a veterinarian, by definition, their focus is medical, and the trainer's focus is behavioral. If you're lucky, you have a vet who's also aware of behavioral and a trainer who's also aware of medical issues. But ultimately, as an owner, and this is my perspective as an owner, you are your dog's advocate. You have to be aware of the big picture. You can't just focus on, I'm going to a trainer, there's a training issue, or I'm going to a vet, there's a medical issue. Ultimately, it's your job as the owner to give feedback to whatever experts you're dealing with, that you trust and you're working with, to make sure that all the aspects of what your dog needs are being addressed. So now that all that background on this, the issue I'm going to be talking about is a food issue, a digestive health issue. And I just, again, want to emphasize, I'm telling Micki's story and my personal experience. I am not giving medical advice. No one should listen to this anonymous person on a podcast and say, I heard so-and-so would say, and therefore for my dog. This is all, like I say, my experience, Micki's experience. So we know food is a primary reinforcer. Eating is a basic life activity. We take it for granted. We just, as positive reinforcement trainers, we assume the dog is going to eat the treat. Eating is also a behavior, and I have to give an enormous shout out to Kathy Sadeo. She has a webinar presentation that she does on Your Dog's Not Food Motivated, which, I was lucky to watch. And I always felt that Kathy was whispering in my ear throughout this. So, eating is also a behavior that can be influenced by consequences and also antecedents. So, like I say, if that behavior of eating gets broken, it affects everything else. I remember I was hearing Ken Ramirez says when he's asked, what is the first behavior you teach a new animal? He says, well, first they have to take food from me, and for some dogs, that's easy. My first dog, her taking food was never an issue. For Micki, as I said, the dog who spit out treats, it was more of an issue. Now, Micki's food issues went beyond just, she's a fussy dog, and spits out treats. She had a history of food intolerance as a puppy, which presented as diarrhea. It took until she was 8 months old until we reliably had well-formed poops out of this dog. She could not eat chicken, beef, turkey, lamb. I ended up settling on a whitefish-based diet, seemed to work really well for her. And, even though, she was limited to whitefish diet, I tried really hard to just make sure it was still a varied diet. I bought a dehydrator so I could dehydrate, to make whitefish training treats. I baked her sardine cookies and salmon cookies. She had fish skin chews that she ate. My husband used to joke that every time he opened the front door, he expected to see a flock of penguins because the house just smelled and we had just so much fish constantly cooking and such. But even then, once we found the food, there's still Micki had a history of what I always call Micki eats days and Micki doesn't eat days. And I just always assumed, the same dog who wouldn't go running through a door, just sometimes wouldn't go running through to the food bowl. And this was just her. And I never wanted to make an issue issue over it because I felt if I put pressure on it and made an issue, it'd become a bigger issue. So just she ended up eating. If she didn't eat one day, she seemed to devour everything the next day. She was growing normally. Her weight was normal. So I just accepted the label of she's just not as food motivated as my first dog. And as long as she's eating, drinking, pooping, peeing, and maintaining a healthy weight, I'm just not going to worry about it. She also had a history of 2-3 times a year, she would throw up, and not just throw up once, because, if you look up vomit in dog on Google, you basically get, yeah, they do. Dogs get into things, dogs throw up, and usually it's not a big deal. Then they recover and you're fine. But this would be where she would throw up like multiple times over a course of a couple of days. And the rule of thumb I always went by was that if she threw up once, don't worry, just watch her. She threw up multiple times. It was time to take her to the vet. Now, as a puppy, she was a very destructive chewer. I mean, she just shredded everything and wasn't always sure. I once found fibers in her poop. So there was always a concern that she threw up because she had swallowed something. So threw up multiple times. She went to the vet, got an x-ray, did this enough times that one time the vet said, oh yeah, she just jumped up on the x-ray table and laid down because, she knew the routine at that point. Never found anything, always cleared up in a couple of days. And again, she was eating, drinking, pooping, peeing, healthy weight. So, okay, again, this is just something. Then last August, things started getting much worse. She was vomiting more frequently over the course of now weeks, not just days. It was also affecting her appetite in the morning, where she just not only just wasn't eating, but she was like lipping, which is a sign of nausea. She just was looking more like a dog who didn't feel well. And it wasn't just, not I'll eat it later, but just not looking like she did not feel well. Now, I initially thought that it was bilious vomiting syndrome, which is also people, I think, refer to it as hunger pukes, which is typically they throw up and it's just sort of the foamy stomach juices. It can be yellow or greenish. And the first time that happened, I was like, oh no, what's wrong with her? And the vet said, oh no, there's sometimes just having an empty stomach can make a dog nauseous, which of course becomes this catch-22. They're nauseous because the stomach is empty, so they don't want to eat. But because they're not eating, the stomach is empty and they're nauseous. And you want them to eat so that then they feel better. So, it's clear this is going on. So the issue is, how do I get her to eat? And for some reason, one morning, I put her breakfast in a Kong. Absolute game changer. The dog, who was licking her lips and walking away, saw the Kong, immediately went over and ate her breakfast. And it's like, oh, wow. It was change the antecedent, change the behavior. I guess the association of a Kong being a good thing was enough that now I'm going to eat. And was funny also, like I tried putting the Kong on a plate. She wouldn't go near it. Put the Kong in a bowl. She won't eat it. Put the Kong on the floor. She immediately ate it. So this was good. So now she got her eating breakfast. But the concern was, if I'm not addressing the underlying medical issue, I risk that, this new antecedent is going to get tainted. She's going to still feel nauseous now when she sees the Kong and not want to eat the Kong. So I was trying, I started feeding her multiple meals a day, which is supposed to be one way of addressing bilious vomiting syndrome, but she wouldn't always eat, the small meals. At this point, I made the very, very difficult decision to take her to see a new vet. And I want to be clear, it's not a comment on my prior vet. I liked my prior vet. It was a difficult decision. And I have no idea what that vet would have ended up doing if I kept going back. But for my peace of mind, I just felt I needed a new set of eyes on Micki. Someone who hadn't seen her through all the prior issues and could just take a fresh look at her. And this was during COVID. So I had criteria that I wanted to find a vet that I could go in with, because it wasn't just about the vet seeing Micki. It was also about me establishing a relationship with a new vet, because I consider that's very important, that I need to be able to ask my questions. I need to be able to understand what's going on. And I need them to also have some respect for me, that I'm not just a, hysterical dog owner or whatever, that I am the type of person who who thinks about things and such. So I found a vet that allowed the owner to come in. And I also they also had the COVID restrictions that you waited in your car. And so when you came in, you just went straight into the room. You weren't waiting around other people in a waiting room. They came highly recommended. And I went to the new vet and we began. And I have to say right off the bat, I liked the vet. She got down on the floor with Micki, completed a lot of the initial exam, just with Micki probably thinking she was being played with and cuddled before, she went on to more invasive poking. So she recommended a series of blood tests to see how the organs are going. And one of the tests she recommended was to test cortisol level because intermittent vomiting can be a sign of Addison's disease, which is low cortisol level. Got back the results of the initial test, and Micki's cortisol level was low, which required then a second test, like the test for Addison. Sort of that first test is an initial screening, and then there's a more specific test where they give you insert a hormone and then test like half an hour later to see how the body responds. So she had that blood test done. That blood test, unfortunately, was done right before Labor Day weekend, which meant between the labs being, timeline and the vet's office vacation, I spent all of Labor Day weekend a nervous wreck, worrying about, oh my God, does my dog have Addison's, and spending all that time informing myself about it. Turned out Micki did not have Addison's, but that is, like I say, if you have intermittent vomiting, that is a possibility. The next step that the vet recommended was to do an ultrasound. And they had an internal medicine specialist who would come to their practice with her equipment and do the ultrasound. And they explained that, because they're doing this procedure, you'd wait out in the car and my vet would meet with the internal medicine person and get the results. And then she said they do a very thorough, review. And then she would go through those results with me. Because of the timing of it, it turned out the vet that I had now seen a couple of times and had been starting to build a relationship was out sick that day. So rather than make me wait, another vet that I did not have a relationship with came out to give me the report, which I think then also made it harder on me. And I'm going to go through what this vet said. And I don't know if anyone who hasn't experienced this can fully understand just how gut-wrenching it was listening to all of this. Felt like I was being repeatedly punched in the stomach. I started by saying that the vet suspected it was food sensitivities. To a little bit, just to explain allergies versus intolerance. A food allergy, an allergy is your immunological system marshals a response to the allergen that's attacking you or that it thinks is attacking you. An intolerance is more specific. And the example is just someone who has a milk allergy can get hives, can get wheezing, can have a serious reaction. Someone who's lactose intolerant gets gas and diarrhea. It's sort of based in the digestive tract. But it's not so simple because an allergy can cause GI symptoms and an intolerance can be serious. And in dogs, there are generally three types of allergies. There's flea allergies, environmental allergies, and food allergies. Actual food allergies are relatively uncommon, but they're tested, they're suspected because, in a sense, food is something you can control. So they use the term sensitivity. I've heard the word sensitivity sometimes to mean allergy or sensitivity could mean allergy or intolerance. So I'm not going to get into that because I'm not a medical person, so I'm going to focus more on allergy versus intolerance. Now, I already knew Micki had seasonal allergies. Come spring and fall, she'd get an itchy snout, itchy ears, and she'd take medication for that. I didn't know if that could be affecting her GI system. I bought a HEPA filter just in case to keep in the room she's usually in. So an allergy is usually also to a protein, whereas an intolerance can be to anything about the food. It could be to the amount of fiber. It could be to the fat content. For example, even though Micki was on a fish diet, I once gave her a fish kibble that the ingredients all seemed the same, but it gave her diarrhea. So there was something in that kibble that, even though it was a fish kibble, must just didn't agree with her. So anyway, so the vet says she needs to be on a prescription diet of hydrolyzed protein for 3 to 4 months. Now, the idea behind a hydrolyzed protein is an elimination diet. You basically eliminate anything the dog's already been getting, and you give something that the dog should not have a reaction to. Some people do an elimination diet by giving a novel protein. Sort of if a dog has never eaten lamb or has never eaten alligator, they have, a kangaroo, you can do some vets will, call for an elimination diet, just doing a new protein and a new carbohydrate. You have to be careful. Like if you use an over-the-counter diet that seems to just be that novel protein, they're not subject to the same type of scrutiny and control. And sometimes those foods can test that they have other proteins in it. And I'm not calling out any particular brand or anything. I've read, articles saying it just can, and some tests that show that other proteins you don't expect in it. There are prescription diets that are single protein and, novel protein, novel carbohydrate that can be used for elimination. Given how many proteins, though, we already knew Micki had a problem with: chicken, turkey, beef, lamb, I don't think it would have made any sense to say, well, let's see if she's okay on rabbit, because, well, what if she was also, had a problem with rabbit? So the hydrolyzed protein means that the protein is broken down into such small pieces, your body doesn't recognize it as the source protein that it comes from. There are also some prescriptions that are broken down even further, where it's just the amino acids. I think that was relatively new at the time. The vet didn't recommend that. So we were going to go on a hydrolyzed protein elimination diet for what she said would be 3 to 4 months. And that means that is all you can have. So, and now this was a situation where, like I say, it was a vet I hadn't dealt with before. And she used the words, and she's on too many supplements. Now, I'm sure what the vet was saying, you're giving her supplements that could potentially have things she's allergic to. So we have to eliminate those as well. But of course, I'm standing there like a wreck and I hear, too many supplements? What do you mean? You're criticizing all these supplements I've been giving my dog to keep her healthy? So that also, again, another punch to the gut. They changed the probiotics she was on. She'd been on a probiotic both for behavioral health and for gut health. Had to switch to the one they recommended. Had to change her heartworm and flea medication. The heartworm ended up being a topical heartworm. And then no toothpaste. We've talked about the beautiful husbandry skill. Micki's teeth, 5 years old. She has white teeth. I'm very proud of that. No toothpaste, because they can have flavoring. Anything that can have flavoring. Nothing is supposed to pass that dog's lips except the hydrolyzed protein food. I asked about treats. Nope, just the hydrolyzed protein. And it's like, like I say, I got in the car and I felt pummeled from head to toe, with this information. It was not what I was expecting. I was hoping the vet would say, I see such and such. We just need to do this. And that's, okay, so 3 to 4 months. And it's not even that I was doing any training. We don't do obedience. We don't do agility, where all of a sudden I was like, what am I going to use for food reinforcement? But just all the things, the husbandry skills, the coming back in when recall, all the general life things where she was used to getting reinforcement. And now I, had hydrolyzed protein food. And, I think of the analogy that, like, if you have someone who does agility training and their dog comes up with a lame leg, it's a fundamental behavior. They need to be running agility. The person doesn't say, I'm just going to keep running agility. They'll just use the other 3 legs while I'm separately dealing with the injury to that paw. It's like, no, you have to focus on this medical issue. It affects everything. So now if the behavior of eating is broken, you can't think about, what about all these other behaviors? You need to focus on, how am I going to make the behavior of eating work before I can do anything else? Like I said, I had always thought variety and choice was so important, that she had an assortment of fish treats. She had, at this point, I actually at times asked myself and wondered, oh my God, all that choice I've been giving Micki, is it now going to come and bite me in the rear? Because now for 3 or 4 months, she can't have choice when it comes to eating. She's just going to have this hydrolyzed protein food. And obviously I'm concerned about her physical health, but as her owner, I'm also concerned about maintaining her behavioral health. Now, like I say, this is an issue. I was going on an elimination diet. I think it's probably an issue that anyone going on a prescription diet faces, depending on what else, given what they're taking the prescription diet for, whether the vet allows other things. Now, around this time, the same time I'm feeling beaten up, I happened to be listening to a Drinking from the Toilet episode with Hannah Brannigan. And it's not even on this subject, but at some point in it, as an example, she just mentions, and it's like when you have a dog going on a food elimination and all they can eat is this, I forget what word she used to describe the food, but it wasn't particularly flattering. And you have to break it down. You have to break down the behaviors. And it was like, that's it. Yes, I have to break things down. I have to break things down. And like I say, the rest of the podcast had nothing to do with this, but just hearing Hannah and Hannah's voice say, you'd have to break it down. It was like, okay, I know about training. I can do this. The food came as canned food, a kibble, and they also made a hydrolyzed protein treat, which was sort of a cracker that could be broken up into smaller pieces. I ordered all three, but I felt that it was important to start one at a time because if there was a problem, you wouldn't know what was causing it. I also sort of didn't want to use up all the resources at once. I wanted to be able to change things because she was used to variety. The canned food is disgusting. This is partially broken down protein. What goes in pretty much smells like what comes out. It's like no more penguins at the door. Penguins would not have wanted the hydrolyzed protein canned food. So before, I had to order the food online. And before the food even came, I started thinking about, okay, how am I going to transition her to this? And I started doing that, like I say, before the new food even arrived. I started cutting back the different treats she was getting. I put the canned food, she was getting an assortment of foods, one of which was a canned food. I started putting that in a food squeeze tube, which was immediately the way I thought, you could give this as a treat. And I started offering that to her in situations where she had been getting reinforcement in our husbandry work, for example. And she took it, and it was like, oh, okay. Now, I also, like I say, what happened with that Kong and the fact that she would eat the breakfast of the Kong and the effect antecedents had on her eating, like I say, played such a big role. The fact that first step had happened is now I'm thinking, okay, what antecedents in her life say eat me, but also what antecedents in her life say eat this specific thing. So, for example, the Kong said, eat me. So food in a Kong, good. The Kong can signal her this is something to eat. But a lick mat, I only use the lick mat for peanut butter. So I was afraid that smearing the hydrolyzed protein on her old lick mat would be, wait a minute, this lick mat signals peanut butter. So I changed out her lick mats for ones that were different shapes, different textures, to try to avoid things like that. She used to, if I finished a container of yogurt or cottage cheese, I would let her lick out the container. I made sure to never leave a container on the counter so that she wouldn't see it and expect that she was going to be getting it. Quite honestly, I stopped eating peanut butter during this because I just didn't even want her to smell the peanut butter and have that trigger something into her. I, read as much as I could on this. Now, in terms of reading this on the internet, you can get some very good information and you can get some not so good information, and you can get controversial information where some people will say this and some people will say that. I tried very hard to find, sort of not only what I consider reputable, but especially I was developing this new relationship with the vet. So it was important to me with my credibility that when I spoke to her, that if I cited something, that I was citing something that not only I thought was a reputable source, but that she would recognize as a reputable source. Because first of all, then we can talk about it because we agree this is a reputable source. And it also tells her that I know what is a reputable source to build my credibility with her. So Tufts Veterinary School, their nutrition department has a blog. It's a searchable blog. They have some excellent articles on there about food allergies. Cornell and Tufts Veterinary School have a newsletter specifically targeted to owners. I subscribed to the Tufts one, and it just turned out some of the articles at the time were related to this. There's also a site, the Veterinary Information Network, which is a searchable thing that's also considered reputable by veterinarians. I found other sources that claim to be for veterinarians, but I didn't know whether my veterinarian would think it was reputable, so I generally didn't cite those. Once I had a relationship relationship, I might ask, do you consider this source reputable? But at the beginning, I was going to limit myself to things I knew she would consider enough. If I read it somewhere, I would check footnotes to see why they were saying that and to see if I could find more support for that. So I started with the canned food, and I had, watered it down and put it in the feeding tube. But, it's like, okay, so now what else can I do with this? And I almost, I referred to this on the ATA that I felt like I was playing Iron Chef hydrolyzed protein. Iron Chef, you're given an ingredient, except they are given an entire kitchen of supplies to use with that. I had Iron Chef hydrolyzed protein with the kitchen ingredients of canned hydrolyzed protein. So around this time, it just so happened that I think an ice cube dropped on the floor and Micki jumped on it and chewed it up. And I usually don't let her eat ice cubes because I know this is a whole issue, whether you let your dog chew ice or not. But like a little light bulb went off. She likes chewing on something that cold. So I started making like little meatballs and freezing them of the canned food, which was disgusting. The stuff is sticky. It was very labor intensive. So I also, from having baked cookies for her, I also had the silicone pyramid pans. So I spread the food on the silicone pyramid pans, put it in the freezer. That worked well because then I had something hard to toss to her. But, for any math geeks out there, a pyramid has relatively a lot of surface area per volume, which meant they melted pretty quickly. So I then got dot ones, which were basically made hemispheres. And a sphere has much less relative surface area to volume. So those lasted longer. I also got a plastic box and would line it with those blue ice freezer blocks. And I'd put, a bunch of the treats in there, and I could have treats that I could toss to her or to hand to her that lasted about half an hour. I couldn't hold more than one in my hand at a time or it would melt. But so I now had that to use as a reinforcer. I also tried baking them. The first time I tried a high heat to see if that would set them. They've crumbled. Then I used a lower heat and that worked well. So I was also able to bake it. I'll just add here, I do not know how baking the food affects the nutritional profile of the food. So I know I was always careful not to, in using those baked hydrolyzed protein treats that I made, to not make them the overwhelming majority of her food in a day. It was as a treat. I also then started freezing it in different shapes. Like she used to get a fish skin treat after breakfast every day. I toss it to her, she'd pick it up, run into her den and crunch on it. So I bought ice cube trays that were designed to make ice cubes to fit in water bottles, which meant they meant like long sticks. So that became something I could toss to her. She could pick it up, take it into the other room and crunch on it. And in fact, that seemed to become like she really liked the food, I'm reading her mind, but, she would devour when I give her these sticks of the food. So I also then took a silicone water bowl, the type that you push in the bottom and they flatten it, and I would make frozen discs of the food as another way of giving it. She would get the food cut up in chunks. She would get it mixed with water. She would get it in the tube. She would get it on the finger. I found, for example, I could offer her the tube with the food and she'd turn away. I put the same exact food on my finger and she would lick it. So again, how it was all the same food. All of these were that same can of hydrolyzed protein. But I found all these different ways to present them to her. So I could offer her choice. Do you want the frozen treat? Do you want the baked treat? Do you want the tube? So, and I know they were different treats because she reacted differently to them. Now I'll go into a problem that you can have when you're on a prescription food where it's limited, giving medicine. And I'm also going to give a shout out. Kathy Sadeo has a wonderful presentation on how to give medication not wrapped in food, but I'm not there. But so I always gave Micki her pills, wrapped in peanut butter or cream cheese. You can't do that. Okay, so I have the canned food. You wrap it in the canned food. Well, if the dog figures out the pill is in the peanut butter, next day you give it in cream cheese. Dog figures out the pill is in the hydrolyzed protein food. The next day you still have to use the hydrolyzed protein food. So I had two situations where the pill taking got poisoned. One was I made the little meatball around the pill too big, so she ended up having to bite into it. And once, she got an electric static zap to the nose as I was giving it to her. So I had to rebuild the trust in pill taking using the same canned hydrolyzed protein food. And again, you can't change the food, but you can change the antecedents. So, I would normally stand up and hold my hand a certain way to present the pill. I sat down. I smeared the food just on my hand, presented the hand in a different way. way to get her licking back to used to taking the food from my hand. I would present the little meatball on the food on a spoon. So again, it was now getting closer to the same form, but my hand, was on the spoon until I could. Now, fortunately, I think we had a long enough history of trust of her taking things from my hand that I was able to rebuild that trust pretty quickly. But it's like, again, this is one of the challenges when all you have is that one food. Now, while this is going on, I'm also keeping a spreadsheet of everything coming in and out so that I would have that information. Because, we all know data is important. I set up the spreadsheet on my phone. But what happens is you then, you see correlations and you don't always know what the cause is. So the first thing I started noticing at this point, once she'd been on these changes for a couple of weeks, is actually her burping and hard swallows. A hard swallow is sort of, if you think when you get some regurgitation and it doesn't actually come all the way up and you swallow, it down, and you'll see a dog do a hard swallow. And that's sort of also a sign of reflux or nausea. And also burping and reverse sneezing and, sort of it's all connected, the throat and the nasal passages. So it all can all be, so I'm asking the vet about this and, we're not sure what it is. And I finally figure out it was the new probiotic. I read the, sort of the warnings that it can cause certain things. So here was, we switched probiotics to try to make things better, but you always need to be aware of, what's changing and why. What changed? The only things that changed is the hydrolyzed protein. I don't think the hydrolyzed protein is causing things to get worse. Well, maybe it's this. So the probiotics she had been on before were actually made by the same company that made the hydrolyzed canned food. And I called them up, and it turned out that on the label, it doesn't say this, it just says flavoring, but they use the same hydrolyzed protein in the food as they do in the probiotics. So based on that, to flavor the probiotics. So I knew that it was okay then to go back to those prior probiotics. And and I run all this by the vet. And now, like I say, because it doesn't say that on the label, I don't know if they'll always do that, so someone shouldn't assume that if they pick up a package and, so that the burping and all of that got better. Now, at this point, she's been on it a few weeks and I just thought, okay, it's time to try the kibble and the treats so I can add more variety. Good news is she liked the kibble. The kibble was relatively big, but I was able to use the kitchen shears to cut it into quarters, use it as training treats, and she seemed to love it. I don't know if it tasted good. It was just because now it was something new. And then she got diarrhea. So I don't know what it is about the kibble. The formulation is slightly different. It has, I think, a different carbohydrate than the canned food. It also had hydrolyzed chicken as opposed to just hydrolyzed chicken liver. I have no idea. Some dogs will react to a protein even though it's been hydrolyzed. So could it be that it was because it was chicken-based? I don't know. Could it be something else about the formulation? Remember, there was that fish kibble that gave her diarrhea, even though it seemed to have the same ingredients as other fish kibble. There's also, I did a search on Google Scholar. If you type in hydrolyzed protein and diarrhea, it is possible that the small makeup of the protein can cause diarrhea. I'm not saying that's common. I'm not saying that's what happened here. Again, there are all these different things. I don't know why, but I had to stop the kibble. And the same thing happened with the treat. So I'm back to just my can of hydrolyzed protein. Now, after 6 weeks, because I know the vet had originally said 3 to 4 weeks, but from what I had read, that length of time is more for when you think it's an allergy and it's causing skin issues, that it can take that long for that to clear up. But that if it's an intolerance, you might be able to switch earlier. So after 6 weeks, I'm chomping at the bit to now, she's been doing okay. Your GI symptoms seem okay. And what you do on an elimination diet is you eliminate everything, but then there's the challenge where you then reintroduce things to see if they in fact now cause the problem. Some people will say, listen, if the prescription food's working, don't bother with the challenge. But I really wanted to get her back on a more normal diet. So I wanted to start the challenge, but the vet convinced me to hold off. And it was a good thing I did, because come 8 weeks, she started throwing up again. And if I had changed the food, if I had tried to do the challenge, I would have assumed, see, it was the change in food that caused it. But instead, this was again, Micki's vomiting symptoms wax and wane. She could go a while between. So, and this wasn't just limited to hunger pukes. She was throwing up with chunks of food being, I'm sorry, all the discussion of vomit and poop, but there were chunks coming up hours after she had eaten. So at this point, again, I'm pretty sure, okay, I think this shows it's not the food, but the vet encouraged me to continue on the prescription food so that as we tried other things, we were only changing one variable, so that we could see what things were. So the next, and through this, she's consulting with the internal medicine veterinarian who had done the ultrasound. So the next step was we put her on a medication to improve gut motility. And at first, it seemed to work wonderfully. She was no longer having the upper GI symptoms. She also just seemed happier and more playful, like she felt better. And I'm like, this is terrific. But then she started having loose poop, like there'd be a watery in the middle of her poop. Now, at first, it was sort of, well, given things were getting better, we could live with a little of that, but it kept getting worse. The diarrhea kept getting worse, more often, more, unpleasant. So I started at this point cutting back the dosage. And when we cut back the dosage, the diarrhea got better, which in my mind showed it was the medication causing it. We kept trying to cut back the dosage to see if we could get to a therapeutic level where it resolved the upper GI, but wasn't causing the lower GI. But every time we cut it back, the improvement in the lower GI was short-lived. It's like her poops would get better, and then after a few days or a week, they get worse. Now, at this point, I'm convinced that it is not the food. So I start reintroducing a fish kibble that she'd been eating beforehand, since in my mind, we've established it's not the food. And I was just giving it to her, as treats. I don't think I ever got past more than a quarter cup at this point. Well, now she develops anal gland issues. We go and her anal glands had to be expressed, and then 2 weeks later, they needed to be expressed again. And there is a term the vets use, itchy ears and rears, that anal gland problems can be a sign of an allergy. And she says, it might be the food you just put her on could be causing this. Now, anal gland problems can also be a result of the diarrhea because the dog's anal glands naturally are expressed when they have a normal, firm poop. So, didn't know yet at this point, so she went back on the hydrolyzed protein only, eliminated the kibble again, because we needed to know, we needed to go back to limiting what the variables were. The vet also started putting her on a supplement for poop quality. Now, looking back on it, I think I can say pretty confidently the anal gland issue was related to the diarrhea, because once we eventually got the diarrhea under control, she's had no more anal gland issues. So now we're still trying to cut back on the dosage. And then what I thought was an unrelated behavioral issue arises. Now, obviously, the fact that I'm mentioning it wasn't an unrelated issue. She started barking at night. Like I would go to bed and 1 a.m., she'd start barking. So at first I think, okay, some neighbor has changed their schedule. They're coming home 1 a.m. I started to think about what's going on that's causing this. She had just recently stopped sleeping in a crate because she'd been such a destructive chewer as a puppy, until that was no longer an issue. She slept in a crate. And then after that, it was just a habit. She'd come in after her last night pee and poop, and she'd walk herself into the crate and lay down and go to sleep. A few weeks before this, she'd come back in and she'd go lay down on the couch. And I didn't make an issue of it. There was no need for her to sleep in the crate. So she was starting to sleep outside of the crate. So I'm like, okay, so is now being out of the crate a little scary? I tried having her sleep in the crate again. That didn't resolve the problem. My daughters had come home for a visit. Is it because she wants their attention she's barking? I tried to view this as a behavioral issue. And okay, so now what can I do? Needless to say, I am not my best between 1 a.m. and 5 a.m. at night. And this was only an issue between 1 a.m. and 5 a.m. at night. I could leave her, go out, go upstairs, not be with her, never the barking, only at night. So I tried to change antecedents. I left the light on. I tried playing scent games before bedtime to try to relax her. I tried hiding Kongs around the room so that she would have to hunt them out and then lick them, and that would relax her. I there's a tension between I want to make sure her needs are met, but I also don't want to be reinforcing her barking like this makes mom come downstairs and sit with me. So like I say, I'm trying all of this. And then one day I come down to try to convince her to please be quiet. And she races to the back door. I let her out and she has explosive diarrhea. And I smack myself in the head and go, you idiot. It's the medication. It's her upset stomach that has her up at night. Okay, so now at this point, I don't know if I mentioned or not, the medication that we were trying to taper off, gut motility, you cannot discontinue all at once. It has to be tapered off. So even at this point, when I know I need to get the dog off this medication, I couldn't just stop it. It still took a few days before I could taper it off. Now, I had also been told the side effect of this medication was that it could cause agitation, but I didn't make the connection because I didn't see that during the day. It was only at night. And it's only after the fact I say, okay, was it the medication causing agitation? Was it the medication causing GI distress? Was it the medication causing both? Did the agitation cause the diarrhea? Did the diarrhea cause the anxiety? All I know, but it all seemed to go back to that medication. Realize at this point, it's the medication. Finally get her off it. It doesn't stop with the medication stopping. So I think now we have a behavioral issue where the night has become a stressful time. And I'm still trying to work on what I can do. And then finally, one morning, she had chewed the metal tag off her collar. And that was just a sign to me that, okay, this is serious. At this point, she goes on anti-anxiety meds to help her sleep. It took a few tries to get the right combination of meds. And then, she sleeps at night, thankfully for all of us. We try another medication for motility, also causes diarrhea. And now the upper GI symptoms are coming back. We run more blood tests. And at this point in February, I feel I have to transition her off the hydrolyzed protein. First of all, it's clear it's not working. And now also because she's not feeling well more often, it's getting her harder and harder to get her to eat. More presentations of the food are becoming associated with not feeling well. I have to constantly be changing the antecedents. Will she eat outside? Will she eat in the kitchen? Will she eat in the den? Will she eat this form? Will she eat not? So I need to get her off the hydrolyzed protein. She's also at this point lost about 10% of her body weight. I was also concerned that once we got into March, there was a possibility of seasonal allergies affecting things. So I wanted to transition her off before the seasonal allergies could kick in. There were also supply chain issues where I was once down to 3 cans before I got a shipment. So I started adding things in. Quite honestly, the first things I add in weren't even food. It was peanut butter, cream cheese, yogurt, cottage cheese, things to make her world bigger. Very slowly, I managed to get her back on a fish-based diet. She's still having the upper GI problems, but I keep telling myself, we now know it's not the food. She'll go weeks where everything seems good, only to have a resurgence. And I definitely see when she's not feeling well, it affects her behavior. It's just, she's a different dog. She's less tolerant when she plays with her friends. She's just a little grumpier. When she feels good, it's very different. But now once she's on a more normal diet, it becomes easier to vary antecedents. If she doesn't eat a food one day, I can add a little cottage cheese to it the next morning to make it something different. I can use a different type of fish in it. I can switch something else. Also, because now it's pretty clear to me, at least, that it's a gut motility issue because the gut motility meds helped. I started doing things. I started changing the consistency of the food. She now gets it very liquidy. I puree and grind her food so that it's very soft and liquidy. She takes daily antacids, daily anti-nausea medication. Back in March, we started acupuncture. I had actually thought about it in December, but to find an acupuncture vet that I felt comfortable with and would let me come in, I couldn't get an appointment until March, which I think, even though if you asked me in January, I would have wanted to go in January, but it allowed me to have more knowledge. I now knew what didn't work. I could tell the acupuncture vet what things were. she responded pretty well to the acupuncture. She's still on the other medications too. She's on a combination of stuff. She's on the anti-anxiety meds at night, the anti-nausea, the antacid, an herbal supplement. She gets the acupuncture, and overall, she is more frequently a robust eater. And I have to say this, I love now when she is rude at mealtime, when she is like dancing around, like put the bowl down, I don't want to train that out of her. That is, she feels like eating. It's a joy to have a rude dog at mealtime. And now anytime she's not, it's information. Okay, she's having an off day. Generally, when she goes off, it lasts a day or two. So I think everything I'm doing is helping, but it's not a matter of curing her. It's a matter of controlling it as best we can. And I don't want anyone listening to this say, hydrolyzed protein diets don't work. Fertility drugs don't work. They just didn't work for Micki. For other dogs, they can be the answer. Like I said, one of the reasons I wanted to do this is because I was a fairly well-informed owner, and I thought I had an arsenal of information and resources, and it was incredibly challenging and overwhelming. I was frustrated. I was angry. I cried. I fluctuated between feeling I was in over my head and feeling stupidly overconfident that I could address the stuff. And, a lot of other people go through these things, and yeah, it's awful. It's hard. So people know they're not alone. Maybe if I've offered some ideas of things you can do to try to change antecedents, wonderful, but I don't think, in terms of medically, this is just Micki's experience. And I just want people to be aware of just the complexity of the interaction between underlying health issue and what we then look at behavioral issues. And antecedents rule.
Antecedents do rule, don't they? I appreciate you sharing all of this with us today. And
I appreciate you giving me a venue to share that story because, hopefully if nothing else, someone listens and go, yeah, and at least makes them feel a little better that they're not alone.
Yeah, I think it's really important to, even on a smaller level, kind of like we were talking about earlier, to just recognize that the animals in our lives are having internal experiences that are impacting their behavior all the time. And it's important to be aware of that and to think beyond training sometimes, and to the other things that might be impacting them. So,
yeah, because our animals speak to us through their behavior. So especially as people who are used to training and dealing in behavior, it's easy for our minds to just think behavior.
Yeah. And important to be open and aware to other things that can influence behavior too. So from myself, on behalf of ATA and on behalf of everyone listening today, thank you so much for bravely coming on and sharing with us about your experience with Micki.
Again, you're welcome, and thank you for having me. I just wanted to add that despite the detail I went into in telling Micki's and my story, this was not a complete rendition of everything from Micki's medical history. There were other issues and treatments and tests that were either pursued or discussed with the veterinarians. So please, no one listening to this should do any second guessing because this just reflects the parts I chose to include to convey the story. All her vets were extremely thorough in addressing what was presented to them. And if there are, in fact, any listeners who have made it this far, thank you for having indulged me.
We do, of course, appreciate all of you tuning in as well. And if you have enjoyed this episode and are interested in carrying on the conversation about working with the animals in our lives in the most positive, most fun, and most choice-rich ways, then as mentioned at the start of this episode, the Animal Training Academy community is waiting for you. Head on over to www.atamember.com and click on the membership button in the main menu to learn more about what members are describing as the Netflix social media platform for behavior geeks. That's it for this episode, though. Thank you so much for listening. You'll hear from us again soon.